Sup, nation?
My name, of course, Philip Defranco.
I got patriotic goosebumps.
And honestly, I wish our candidates would start talking about things that actually matter.
Hello, nation. Welcome. The third and final presidential debate is over. Oh, for better or worse. Of course, my name is Philip Defranco. With me, Elliott Morgan, and then today, Governor Gary Johnson. Thank you so much. I was very surprised. I tweeted you, and I did not think that you would actually come here, but this is amazing. It is
Phil,
an honor.
great to be with you. Elliott, great to be with you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm jealous.
Oh, yeah.
You guys have a connection.
We do, automatically. Well, it's because we're on the outsides, so it's like the yin and the yang, you know? We're balancing it.
So, really, I know that we just saw the debate. A big thing that I want to do today is really to interview you, introduce you at the beginning, and then we can go into the debate, because, I mean, they say that international policy is for most Americans not the biggest deal, and so I'm going to try and take advantage of that, introduce you, because I do think that it is a big deal.
I really think it's a big deal. You know, I'm not the third candidate on stage, but I would be the third candidate on stage. I'm on the ballot in 49 states. We're still litigated in the other state. But what you didn't hear up there is that we should stop our military interventions. That our military interventions have resulted in hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that but for our military interventions wouldn't otherwise exist. So military interventions are really not an option. If we're attacked, we're going to attack back, and then there's the whole notion of, you know, imminent threat, which is something that, as President of the United States, I would take that very, very seriously. But Syria, we're funding the Syrian insurgents and their jihadists. Didn't we do this when it came to Afghanistan? Haven't we lived through this before? Libya. We displace Muammar Gaddafi. His personal army goes off and displaces the democracy of Mali, so we're down one democracy when it comes to Libya. I just suggest that everything we do militarily has unintended consequences, and those unintended consequences have hundreds of millions of enemies to this country that wouldn't otherwise exist. Drone strikes. This is why we're hated throughout the world, is we don't just take out the target, we take out innocent people. And when innocent people die, friends and family vow vengeance against the perpetrating nation, and that if that's you or I, we end up pledging our own lives to bring about that vengeance, and we don't care how long it's going to take. And that's the situation that we have in the world today. And the biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we're bankrupt, the fact that we're borrowing and printing money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar that we spend. If you believe Obama is going to cut back on spending, that is just crazy. And then Romney, when he's pressed on how he's going to balance the federal budget, you know, it's an 8-year, 10-year deal. Well, I got to tell you, a lot of growth is built into this. As President of the United States, I'm promising to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. Now, that's not a balanced budget. That's promising to submit a balanced budget. Imagine how contentious that document is going to be, laying out a $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending, which has to start with military spending, taking military spending back to 2003 spending levels, not really the end of the world, and then Medicare. Look, Medicare is a benefit that you and I pay 30 cents into, and we get a dollar benefit. By extension, we pay 30 grand into a benefit that we receive a $100,000 benefit. It's absolutely not sustainable, and all this falls on young people. The onus of all this falls on young people. We want young people to go and fight these wars. So young people are those that die, come back with their limbs blown off. Gosh, you're going to have to work the rest of your lives because I'm going to retire and I'm going to have health care, but you're never going to be able to retire. You're never going to have health care because it's a Ponzi scheme. And it goes on and on and on.
Forever and ever. This is why we had you on. So much passion. And we didn't even get into... If you don't know, a lot of you in the chat or in the room right now, you know Governor Gary Johnson, 2-term governor of New Mexico, Libertarian candidate. It's bittersweet that you are here because you really should have been on that stage, in my opinion.
Well, and we sued to be on stage.
Right.
We sued to be on stage, and of course, you know, you can't get on stage if you're not running, if you're not on the ballot in 49 states, and you're not going to get on stage if you don't sue. So we've sued. But it's a two-party system. It's a system that's gamed against any third party that wants to raise its head. The Presidential Debate Commission are made up of Republicans and Democrats with absolutely no interest in seeing a third party on stage.
Now, go for it.
Well, just on that note, when it comes to the two-party system thing, I know particularly young people, myself oftentimes included in that, I get so oversaturated with politics, and I specifically every 4 years, there's an election, and every election is like make or break, and this is the one where it's like, well, you can't really vote for a third party here because this is the most important one. What do you say to young people who feel oversaturated and disenfranchised with the entire system?
Well, a wasted vote is voting for somebody you don't believe in. That's a wasted vote. You change things in America by voting for the person you believe in. And in this case, I'm asking everybody to waste their vote on me. I'm pledging that nobody will be sorry for that vote. And of course, if everybody does that, I'm the next president of the United States, and we would see military intervention be a policy of the past. We'd reduce this police state that we're living in right now. We'd balance the federal budget. And of course, I can't promise a balanced budget, but I can promise to submit a balanced budget. And then so much talk this evening was about growing the economy. Look, I think we should eliminate income tax, eliminate corporate tax, abolish the IRS, replace all of it with one federal consumption tax. I think that really reboots the American economy for the next 100 years. They're talking about China. Well, look, adopt the fair tax. I'm embracing the fair tax, one federal consumption tax. When you bleed 23% embedded, non-transparent federal tax out of goods and services, that's the answer when it comes to exports with China. And when you talk about U.S. jobs, with a zero corporate tax rate environment, if the private sector doesn't create tens of millions of jobs, I don't know what it takes to create tens of millions of jobs.
So, I mean, I think we should definitely jump on consumption tax. Is it a legitimate means for America in the future? But before I think we go any further, can you tell me what a libertarian is, what a libertarian stands for? Because I think a lot of people would be surprised where their values lie.
Well, so speaking with a broad brushstroke, libertarians are fiscally responsible and socially accepting. That's with a broad brushstroke, and I think the majority of Americans are in that category. So I'm more liberal than Obama on many issues, and I'm a lot more conservative than Romney on a bunch of issues. Offer up a prediction. Either Romney or Obama are elected. We're going to find ourselves with a heightened police state. We're going to find ourselves in a continued state of military interventions. We're going to find ourselves in a continued state of borrowing and printing money in a way that's absolutely not sustainable. So kind of going down the litany of issues, don't bomb Iran. Let's get out of Afghanistan tomorrow, bring the troops home. Marriage equality is a constitutionally guaranteed right. Let's end the drug wars, legalize marijuana now. Repeal the Patriot Act. You know, get rid of Homeland Security. It's incredibly redundant. I would have never signed the National Defense Authorization Act, which allows for you and I as U.S. citizens to be arrested and detained without being charged. I think this is why we fought wars. Balance the federal budget now. If we don't balance the federal budget now, we're going to find ourselves in a monetary collapse. And a monetary collapse, very simply, is when the dollars we have in our pocket don't buy a thing because of the accompanying inflation that is going to go along with this. And then jobs, the economy. Eliminate income tax, corporate tax, abolish the IRS, replace all of it with one federal consumption tax. Imagine our lives not having to deal with the IRS. You have Romney, Obama quibbling over 27% corporate tax, 25% corporate tax, this deduction, that deduction. Let's do away with all the deductions. Let's issue pink slips to half of Washington lobbyists, which would happen if we would adopt one federal consumption tax. It's the answer when it comes to exports. It's the answer when it comes to American jobs.
I want to jump real fast on the military intervention with everything, because I struggle with that a lot, because one part of me is like, absolutely, 100%. I agree we need to not get involved unless it's absolutely 100% in our best interest. That being said, there's also this weird part of me that gets really bothered when I see the oppression and when I see the evil that does oftentimes run rampant in certain parts of the world. So it's hard for me to reconcile this idea of sort of drawing back for the sake of peace.
Well, and Elliott, first off, you hit on something in your first sentence. You talk about, you didn't say vital American interests, but you talked about American interests. Well, what are American interests? What are vital American interests when it comes to our interventions? Well, what we end up doing is we end up supporting a new dictator in lieu of the old dictator, and the consequences that come about really, now we're getting pegged with the new dictator and what the new dictator does. And that's foreign aid. What we don't recognize either is that foreign aid isn't going to poor people in other countries. Foreign aid is going to prop up the governments in these other countries. It's going from poor people in the United States to rich people in these foreign countries.
Now, for people that would then criticize you wanting to pull out, saying maybe that's isolationism, what would you say to that?
I would say it's a show of strength that here we're talking about a country that's really going to be the beacon on the hill when it comes to freedom and liberty. And here's a country that is going to stand up for the bully, which I think is what the United States has been known for. Today, though, I think we're vilified worldwide because we are the bully. We're whom everyone is quaking because we pull the trigger first. And we're talking about Iran right now. I mean, Obama says terrific things. The reality is he doubled down in Afghanistan. I never thought that would happen. He talked about getting out of Iraq. I don't know as we're really out of Iraq, but benefit of the doubt. He's intervened in Libya, intervening in Syria. These are going to have consequences down the road. Mubarak. Here it is. We're saying we've supported Mubarak in the past. He's the lesser of the evils. We made that decision. Well, in 20 years from now, are we going to then say that about the new dictator that takes over from Mubarak? These back to unintended consequence. And in my lifetime, those unintended consequences have added up to just a lot of men and service women losing their lives, a lot of men and service women coming back with their limbs blown off, and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians in these countries that we intervene dying.
Now, I know a really big deal right now. Syria, more footage, a lot of footage was released today of reportedly Assad turning his troops on makeshift hospitals. Would that be something that you think that we should intervene or just stay out of it?
Well, I think that we should stay out of it. Now, when you take individual atrocities
right.
and the notion that from a knee-jerk standpoint that we're going to go in and we're going to clean this up, what we don't recognize is that we pick a new winner. And the new winner at some point points his rifles in the direction of a hospital and does the same thing. Hate to say it, but it's the reality of these military interventions. We're supposed to be picking one entity over another. We just don't have that kind of intelligence.
I think to kind of get away from international policy, something that a lot of people are talking about. This is for question number 4 from Daniel Zhu, who says, what is your stance on universal health care and what problems do you see in Obamacare? As a European citizen, I find it odd that health care is seen as a purchase rather than a service.
Well, universal health care, somebody's got to pay for it. So,
right.
So in this case, the country is bankrupt. The alternative, so I'm the guy that says we need to slash Medicare spending. Medicare is a benefit that you and I pay a third of what ends up to be 100% benefit. It's not sustainable. Universal health care, it's just simply not affordable. When it comes to health care, what's really needed are free market approaches to health care. When I say free market approaches to healthcare in this country is about as far removed from free market as it possibly could be. There aren't really choices. We're restricted in the number of doctors that we have. How many kids have you grown up with? How many that you know are qualified to be doctors that weren't accepted to medical school? What if we doubled the number of doctors that were out there? So in a free market approach for healthcare, I would not have health insurance to cover myself for ongoing medical need. I would have health insurance to cover myself for catastrophic injury and illness, much like car insurance, and I would pay as you go in a system that was genuinely competitive. Advertised pricing, the lid blown off of supply, where I could have a myriad of choices, dozens of choices, where today I virtually have none.
So what do you say to someone that can't afford proper health insurance or is denied a service?
Well, so first of all, in our benevolence to want to take care of people, those that are truly in need, and I think existing medical condition is one of those. In the state of New Mexico, where I was governor, we set up a place where individuals could go and get that coverage if denied everywhere else. So I think that those initiatives really do exist on a state-by-state basis. I just think the federal government has to get out of healthcare delivery completely. Medicaid and Medicare, block grant the states a fixed amount of money, 43% less than what we're currently spending, and give it up to 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice. In my opinion, you'll have some fabulous success that will get emulated. You'll have some horrible failure that will get avoided. But the notion of Washington top-down, knows best, has all the answers, that's what has us in our state of bankruptcy today. I just think it's so disingenuous when both Romney and Obama talk about who's going to spend more money on Medicare when we have to cut Medicare. And right now, as young people, President Obama's health care plan, his universal health care plan, is dependent on healthy people buying insurance to cover those that aren't so healthy. Well, guess where the onus of that all falls? It falls on young people. They're the healthy group.
Okay. Moving over to Twitter, at Cadwallian says, thoughts, and this is just going back to the two-party system, thoughts on third-party candidates in our voting system, pulling votes from the candidates, and which of the candidates do you most agree with?
Well, I agree with parts of what Obama has to say. You know what? Let me take that back. I just find it difficult to disagree with anything that Obama has to say. There's just such a disconnect, though, between what he says and the reality. Romney, on the other hand, he's going to balance the federal budget, but he's going to increase spending for the military, and he's going to hold Medicare intact. It just doesn't add up. I'm sorry, it doesn't add up. And to think that we've got our heads in the sand, and as American people don't recognize this, and as American people, we recognize we're in deep trouble here. But it's going to have to involve mutual sacrifice on the part of all of us to get through this, or we find ourselves with a collapsed government. Back to the monetary collapse. And if you want to look at a monetary collapse or a country that has recently experienced it, it was Russia at the end of the 80s. Ruble went from being worth something one day to being worth nothing the next day. The shelves end up getting bare in a really quick way because we take all the dollars that we have and we rush to the store to buy everything we can because it's clear that the dollars aren't going to buy anything tomorrow or the following day. That's what ends up with empty shelves. And this is a situation that we're setting ourselves up for.
Okay, and I definitely want to keep asking questions. I think what I would also like to do, let's run the first question from tonight's debate, and here that is.
The first question, and it concerns Libya. Governor Romney, you said this was an example of an American policy in the Middle East that is unraveling. I'd like to hear each of you give your thoughts on that. Governor Romney, you won the toss. You go first.
We can't kill our way out of this mess. We're going to have to put in place a very comprehensive and robust strategy to help the world of Islam and other parts of the world reject this radical violent extremism, which it's certainly not on the run. It's certainly not hiding. This is a group that is now involved in 10 or 12 countries, and it presents an enormous threat to our friends, to the world, to America long term, and we must have a comprehensive strategy to help reject this kind of extremism.
With respect to Libya, as I indicated in the last debate, when we received that phone call, I immediately made sure that, number one, we did everything we could to secure those Americans who were still in harm's way. Number two, that we would investigate exactly what happened. And number three, most importantly, that we would go after those who killed Americans and we would bring them to justice. And that's exactly what we're going to do. But I think it's important to step back and think about what happened in Libya. And keep in mind that I and Americans took leadership in organizing an international coalition that made sure that we were able to, without putting troops on the ground, at the cost of less than what we spent in 2 weeks in Iraq, liberate a country that had been under the yoke of dictatorship for 40 years.
So would you agree with Romney saying that Benghazi was, and how Obama handled it was a failure?
I would say that the way they both would have handled it and did handle it is a failure. Why did we have embassy personnel there in the first place in an area that's looking for targets? It's not a show of weakness to not be in these embassies. I think it's a show of, gee, we got brain matter between our ears and we recognize that we are a target. We are a target, so let's not be there. And if I don't even want to say if we were there, because we shouldn't have been there. And both of them talk about friends, our vital American interests, and what it is we're there to protect, and that we want to line up on the right side. Well, the right side ends up to be all the time just as oppressive in different ways or in the same ways as the military regime dictatorship that's been replaced.
So is the international game just a complete no-win?
On
either side?
What are vital American interests? What are vital American interests? Vital American interests are protecting us against nations that would do us harm if we're attacked. The notion of imminent attack. I mean, as President of the United States, I would take that role very seriously to determine imminent attack. But we went through this with Iraq and George Bush and weapons of mass destruction. Gee, none of that panned out at all.
Does a nuclear Iran scare you at all? There was that question that it seemed both candidates dodged, which was that if Israel called and said, we're going in, we're not going to wait anymore, specific vital points, we're going to bomb them.
Well, first off, if I was President of the United States, I would urge Israel to not bomb Iran. That would be first and foremost. And nuclear warheads are about this assured mutual destruction. What's going unsaid here is that Israel has 300 nuclear warheads. Now, I saw the other day that they had 100 nuclear warheads. I guess the big secret, I've heard it referred to as the big secret, they have 300. Maybe you guys can find that out.
We will search.
And get back with me on that. But look, launch a nuclear weapon. Iran launches a nuclear weapon, they are assured of their total destruction, and that would start with Israel launching that total destruction. That's nuclear war. That's the whole nuclear deterrent that exists. Did we threaten to bomb Russia before they got a nuke? Did we threaten to bomb China? No, we got trade going on with China and Russia both, and I refuse to believe that either of them are military threats, given the trade that goes on with both of them.
So you seem to be talking a lot of common sense, which is great. But on that note, just a personal question: when you're president, we'll say when, whether it's in 2012 or it's a libertarian in the future, if a libertarian is president, how do you deal on your first day of office when you look around and realize that it finally happened, a third party was elected president, and all of a sudden you're not surrounded by that third party anymore, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by Republicans and Democrats who have their own little, all of a sudden you're entangled in all of the bureaucracy. What's the first step in overcoming that, and how do you compromise with people like that?
Well, so running for governor of New Mexico, I ran for governor of New Mexico completely outside of politics. I mean, I went and I introduced myself to the Republican Party 2 weeks before I announced. My point is completely outside of politics, although I did run as a Republican, and I made my case to Republicans, but the state of New Mexico is 2-1 Democrat. So I get elected, and I get reelected by a bigger margin the second time. I just think it speaks volumes to the fact that people really do appreciate good stewardship of tax dollars. And I think it speaks volumes to the fact that we put issues first, and politics were non-existent because I wasn't a politician. So if you're talking about a libertarian president, how about the notion of challenging Democrats on what they're supposed to be good at? Not bombing Iran, getting out of Afghanistan, bringing about marriage equality, ending the drug war, repeal the Patriot Act, civil liberties. You guys are supposed to be good on civil liberties. You're horrible on civil liberties. Get some starch. Republicans, I'm vetoing, as Libertarian President of the United States, I'm vetoing this Republican budget bill because it spends way too much money. Imagine them trying to go out and make a case that this guy's crazy, he wants to spend less money. They'll never do it. I just find it an exciting notion to be able to bridge these two parties.
So actually on the note of bridging two parties, we have a question number 2 from a user called Mostly Harmful, who says, most libertarian candidates are incapable of showing a will to compromise, and hence I consider the political philosophy and ideology. Keeps going, how would you actually work with people?
Well, so I was the 2-term governor of New Mexico. I was 2-term governor of New Mexico in a state that was 2-1 Democrat. I made a name for myself vetoing legislation. I may have vetoed more bills than the other 49 governors in the country combined. I vetoed 750 bills. I had thousands of line item vetoes. Only 2 were overturned. So it made a difference when it came to billions of dollars worth of spending. And that kind of talk was something that constantly went on. People were going to be dead in the streets because of my vetoing this or that election. People, you know, government was going to break down. Things were going to be so horrible because there was this inability to compromise. Well, things didn't break down. Things were actually better, and everybody noticed it. And believe me, in a state that's 2-to-1 Democrat, vetoing 750 bills, I'd have been ridden out on a rail if people didn't recognize that it was effective.
Now, you mentioned you vetoed left and right, pretty much.
Left and right. I was an equal opportunity vetoer.
Yeah.
A third of the legislature was Republican. A third of my vetoes were Republican.
So as far as line item vetoes that you talk about, and on the note of compromise, presidents don't have the ability to line item veto. Do you think that's something you would work around, or something that you would try to change?
Well, I would just veto the outright bill, and I would do the same thing that I did as governor of New Mexico, which is, here's my case for vetoing this legislation. If you all want to override, have at it. But here are my reasons. And I found that to be very effective. And keep in mind, if I'm president of the United States, who's got the wind at their back? Who's got the wind at their back to say, we don't want to bomb Iran, we want to get out of Afghanistan, we want to bring about marriage equality, we want to balance the federal budget, we want to end the drug war, we want to reform our tax system. That's the American people shouting at Congress that we want some big, big change.
So would you have outright vetoed the NDAA?
Yes, I would have. I would have outright vetoed the NDAA, and I would have stated this is why. And you know what? Congress can turn a piece of legislation around very, very quickly without that provision. And just as easily they can override. But if they override, you've got a president that's gone on record and said, well, this is why we fought wars, is to prevent you and I as U.S. citizens to be arrested and detained without being charged.
So we're going to continue using your questions. Keep hitting us up with hashtag PDS Live with your questions. While you guys do that, here are the question 1 responses from the other 2 candidates.
Key that we're going to have to pursue is a pathway to get the Muslim world to be able to reject extremism on its own. We don't want another Iraq. We don't want another Afghanistan. That's not the right course for us. The right course for us is to make sure that we go after the people who are leaders of these various anti-American groups and these jihadists, but also help the Muslim world. And how do we do that? The group of Arab scholars came together, organized by the UN, to look at how we can help the world reject these terrorists. And the answer they came up with was this: one, more economic development. We should key our foreign aid, our direct foreign investment, and that of our friends. We should coordinate it to make sure that we push back and give them more economic development. Number 2, better education. Number 3, gender equality. Number 4, the rule of law. We have to help these nations create civil societies. But what's been happening over the last couple of years is, as we've watched this tumult in the Middle East, this rising tide of chaos occur, you see Al-Qaeda rushing in, you see other jihadist groups rushing in, and they're throughout many nations in the Middle East. It's wonderful that Libya seems to be making some progress despite this terrible tragedy. But next door, of course, we have Egypt. Libya's 6 million population, Egypt 80 million population. We want to make sure that we're seeing progress throughout the Middle East.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that Al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not Al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years. You say that you're not interested in duplicating what happened in Iraq, but just a few weeks ago you said you think we should have more troops in Iraq right now.
And attacking me is not an agenda. Attacking me is not talking about how we're going to deal with the challenges that exist in the Middle East and take advantage of the opportunity there and stem the tide of this violence.
This is just a few weeks ago that you indicated that we should still have troops in Iraq.
No, I didn't. I'm sorry. That's just,
you made a major speech.
I indicated that you failed to put in place a status of forces agreement at the end of the conflict that exists.
Governor, here's one thing I've learned as Commander-in-Chief. You've got to be clear, both to our allies and our enemies, about where you stand and what you mean. Now, you just gave a speech a few weeks ago in which you said we should still have troops in Iraq. That is not a recipe for making sure that we are taking advantage of the opportunities and meeting the challenges of the Middle East.
Okay, yeah, so more on the he said, she said in a second, but first I want to jump directly to Twitter. At Mal Kozowski has a question for you, Governor Gary. What are your thoughts on Ron Paul? Because I know that a lot of people aren't familiar with you, but they are familiar with Ron Paul. He sort of was the big mascot for a while. Is there a Johnson/Paul dream ticket on the horizon of the next election?
Well, first of all, in 2008, Ron Paul asked me for my endorsement when he was running for president. I readily gave that endorsement. I thought running for president of the United States as a Republican alongside Ron Paul that it was going to be really difficult to marginalize two people talking about the same thing on the stage. I did not find myself marginalized. I found myself excluded very unfairly. I saw Ron Paul continue to be marginalized. And I saw in my crystal ball Ron Paul not becoming the nominee. And so where does the voice go for liberty and freedom? Well, it was going to be the Libertarian nominee for president that was going to carry this forward. And I saw the opportunity to be that spokesman. And I think that this is really important. And if there had been somebody more viable, it was absolutely an open process. This is the Libertarian Party now, where I was in 12 states and had 12 debates with 12 other libertarians running for the nomination of president.
We have another question from Sean Owens, who says, briefly explain consumption tax or fair tax. I think a lot of people hear this. It's a dramatic change. What would be your plan for selling this concept?
Well, first of all, check it out. It's fairtax.org. It's a proposal right now before Congress, but it's a 23% consumption tax. Ends up being cost neutral over a very short amount of time. So if you use a can of Coke as an example, a can of Coke today that sells for $1 has arguably 23% embedded non-transparent taxes in that can of Coke. It's Social Security match that Coke pays, it's Medicare, it's unemployment, it's corporate taxes that Coke pays. Well, you're going to do away with all of that with one federal consumption tax, no more IRS, no more withholdings from your payroll check. Social Security, Medicare, unemployment will come out of the proceeds of the fair tax. So it ends up being cost neutral over a very short amount of time. So when I talk about it being the answer to exports, it's bleeding all non-transparent federal taxes out of goods and services. And so Coke won't sell that can, doesn't have to sell that can of Coke for $1 anymore to make the same profit. They can sell it for 80 cents. You apply the 23% consumption tax, it ends up being cost neutral. Because you bleed out non-transparent taxes, it's the answer to exports. You're going to make exports 23% more competitive. It's the answer to jobs. Zero corporate tax rate, manufacturing jobs will flock back to the United States. Tens of millions of jobs will be created by the private sector in this country given a zero corporate tax rate environment. And crony capitalism, alive and well. We enact the fair tax, we're going to issue pink slips to half of Washington lobbyists because half of Washington lobbyists are there to garner loopholes that I got to tell you are for sale.
So I know, like back in I think it was 2008 when it was Mike Huckabee for I think Mike Huckabee.
Yeah, he espoused the fair tax.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I was laughing because I was thinking of all those poor lobbyists without jobs.
That's sad. But when I first heard about the fair tax, I was like, oh, this sounds perfect. It sounds amazing. It sounds like the answer to all of our problems, which upon hearing it again sounds like that. But since then, there's all of these reports from experts, and I don't know what that means. I feel like that word gets thrown around a lot. But you know, if someone says they're an expert, fantastic. But there are all of these experts everywhere that say there's no possible way that it could work. Maybe it could if, say, something were to happen and we were to put the fair tax into motion and it didn't work. What does that look like? What happens at that point?
You know, in this quest for me, Libertarian nominee for president, I've got a lot of free market economists that have hitched their wagon, really a lot of smart people that have hitched their wagon behind my voice, and I always apologize to them because I try and do as good as I can, but I can't do as good as they could if given the same opportunity. But to a person, they would all argue that this would be a better system than what we currently have. Speaking to fair. Now, what needs to occur is one federal consumption tax. I'm embracing the fair tax because it is a proposal that's out there. It would be terrific to debate and discuss on the finer points of the fair tax. Is this the best way to deal with the fact that this is a regressive tax? Well, the way the fair tax deals with it is it gives you and I a $200 a month prebate check. So we get $2,400 a year. Everybody in the country gets $2,400 a year that allows all of us to pay the fair tax up to the point of the poverty level. It's an unavoidable amount of consumption tax that you're going to have to pay for clothing, food, shelter, transportation, whatever.
Okay. And then just on a broader note, especially considering the clip we just watched, when you, as a candidate for president, watch these debates, because I know I've gotten to the point, I've only been really getting involved in politics as we go for like the past year. As someone who's been in the trenches for so long, when you watch these debates, are you emotionally invested? Do you feel like every answer to every question is going to tip the result one way or the other?
Well, the way I ran 2 campaigns for governor where I did not mention my opponent in print, radio, or television. The notion being that people, I think, are hungry to vote for somebody as opposed to the lesser of 2 evils. So when I ran for re-election in New Mexico, I controlled the debate process because I was the incumbent. I debated my challenger 28 times because I just think debates are a really good way to point out differences. But it's not a tit-for-tat thing. The opportunity here is to present your vision, to present here's the leader that I would be. Here's what I would wake up every single day and doggedly pursue. I think that's what we're hungry for, and I don't get it. I don't get the 2 of them sniping at each other as opposed to using that time to talk about their vision and how that would make a difference.
I think we're going to go to question 2. Keep sending your questions for Governor Gary Johnson using hashtag PDSLive on Twitter. And without further ado, here is that clip.
Syria has now spilled over into Lebanon. We have, more than 100 people that were killed there in a bomb. There were demonstrations. There are 8 people dead. Mr. President, it's been more than a year since you told Assad he had to go. Since then, 30,000 Syrians have died. We've had 300,000 refugees. The war goes on. He's still there. Should we reassess our policy and see if we can find a better way to influence events there, or is that even possible?
What we've done is organize the international community, saying Assad has to go. We have made sure that they are isolated. We have provided humanitarian assistance, and we are helping the opposition organize, and we're particularly interested in making sure that we're mobilizing the moderate forces inside of Syria. I am confident that Assad's days are numbered.
Syria is an opportunity for us because Syria plays an important role in the Middle East, particularly right now. Syria is Iran's only ally in the Arab world. And so seeing Syria remove Assad is a very high priority for us. And finally, we don't want to have military involvement there. I believe that Assad must go. I believe he will go. But I believe we want to make sure that we have the relationships of friendship with the people that take his place. We should be playing the leadership role there.
So both candidates there wanted Assad to go.
Well, and then what I'm hearing is that we want to be on the side, we want friends of the United States to take over. Well, now we're back to the manipulated process, the military interventions, the money that we will spend to back the new regime that, at the end of the day, is it any better than what was displaced? Well, historically, no.
So historically, no, but staying out of it. Are we saying that no matter what we do, it's messed up?
Well, now we're back to, you could argue that the Arab Spring had everything to do with democracy and actually wanting a say in. So you're living in Syria. I want a personal say in my life. I don't want government to tell me what I can and can't do. So that's the root of it all. And who's arguably the beacon for that? Isn't it the United States? And shouldn't we be putting our attention to being that beacon as opposed to, that it's the mob. The United States is the mob. We go in and we pay off the new hierarchy that's coming to play. And what I hear them talking about is that we want to be the puppet masters. We want to manipulate. We want our friends in there so that they'll do the things that we want done. Well, no. These are foreign entities that want to determine their own future, and they're different in the United States, and we're different.
One thing that I feel like, especially when I watch the debates and especially when I see like an ad or something, what you see is, or what I feel that there is a complete lack of sincerity when it comes to politicians. And I feel like there is a desire or a feeling among younger people especially that they don't want to get involved in the political process because they think that they're all liars, they're all owned by corporations, they're all this. Do you believe when you watch Obama and when you watch Romney and you hear all these talking points over and over again, do you believe that they are, if not, even if they are incorrect, do you believe that they're sincere in what they're saying?
Well, no, and I don't want to pick on Obama and Romney. I want to pick on politicians as a whole, and that is that everything is done in the name of elect me and re-elect me. I will save you from the illegal immigrant. I will save you from poor health care. I will save you from drugs. I'll save you from terrorism. And in the name of all that, elect me, re-elect me, and you can be assured that all those things will happen. Well, that comes at a cost. And that cost is the fact that we're bankrupt right now. The inability of Congress to say no when it comes to spending, because they have a printing machine. Imagine Bernie Madoff if he would have had a printing machine. Well, that's the United States government right now. That's the Federal Reserve.
You said you would, how would you save me from drugs? How would you save us from drugs, Gary?
Well, 90% of the drug problem is prohibition related, not use related. Let's legalize marijuana now. Let's stop with the 1.8 million arrests in this country every year on drug-related crime. 2.3 million people behind bars. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. We have tens of millions of convicted felons in this country that, but for our drug laws, would otherwise be tax-paying, law-abiding citizens. Do we want our kids doing drugs? No. But do we want our kids subject to the criminal justice system because half of them are going to smoke pot and under the wrong set of circumstances, half of them are excluded from opportunities that this country still may have available to us?
I think that kind of, it's a segue into kind of this whole idea of legalizing this and legalizing that, which in theory I can get behind, but one thing that I particularly struggle with is the idea of, specifically when it comes to marijuana, I can get behind. I've never done it myself. It seems lovely, but I've never partaken, but I still think that it should be legalized. It seems like common sense for that to happen. Another thing is gambling. It seems like that should be something that's legal, and if an adult wants to do what they want to do, then they should be allowed to do that. One thing I have a hard time with, and I know we were talking about this the other day, is prostitution, because it's something where I feel like legalize it, in theory, in my head, I'm like, absolutely, yes, we need to legalize it, we need to tax it. It should be regulated. People can do what people want to do, but there is always that part of me that's like, no, like that should probably still be illegal.
Well, so Elliott, prostitution has actually established itself as a state's issue. In Nevada, it's legal. Prostitution is legal. Not Las Vegas, but don't ask me how they parse this with the state legislature. But I have never in my life had the inclination to use the services of a prostitute. Never. And I don't expect to for the rest of my life. I just don't expect that to happen. But if I were to enlist the services of a prostitute, if you were to enlist the services of a prostitute, where is the only place in this country that you could do that assured that you wouldn't come in contact with sexually transmitted diseases or HIV, hepatitis C? Wouldn't that be Nevada, where those tests exist, and that you have to be licensed and clean? So it's not only safe for you as the consumer, but it's safe for the woman that would be involved in delivering those services. It's a safer situation in Nevada.
And then we had a viewer question, and it was something that you also mentioned. How are you going to handle immigration?
Well, I'm a border governor, was a border governor with Mexico. We should make it as easy as possible for somebody that wants to come into this country and work to get a work visa. Not a green card, not citizenship, but a work visa. That should entail a background check and a Social Security card so that applicable taxes would get paid. Don't build a fence. That would be an incredible waste of money. For the 11 million illegal immigrants that are here right now, the reason we have 11 million illegal immigrants here in this country right now is because you can't get a work visa and come into this country and work. And yet you know that if you can get it across the border, even illegally, you can get a job. I maintain immigrants would stand in line if the line was moving to get a work visa. And that's my pledge. Back to the work visa, that would entail a background check and a Social Security card that applicable taxes would get paid. If we implement the fair tax, taxes aren't an issue at all, because whether you're a visitor to the U.S., a legal immigrant, illegal immigrant, or a U.S. citizen, nobody is going to avoid paying one federal consumption tax. And then border violence. So much of border violence gets attributed to the negative outlook on immigration. Look, this is a prohibition phenomenon. These are disputes that are being played out with guns rather than the courts. 40,000 deaths south of the border over the last 4 years, guns as opposed to courts. We didn't learn the lesson when it came to the prohibition of alcohol, when disputes were being played out with machine guns as opposed to in the courts.
Now, would those 11 million illegal immigrants, would that be a negative for the fair tax? You said that they would be taxed, but what about those people having jobs that are sending money home?
Well, they could still send money home, but they're going to be paying consumption tax on just to have to live and to have to survive. So taxes would be paid.
It would be interesting to compare the two.
You know, another, just getting back to the fair tax also, there's half the issues surrounding marriage equality have to do with our tax system, have to do with being able to transfer property, taxes being paid. Implement the fair tax, plus 50% of the issues surrounding marriage equality go away.
What are your thoughts on the other 50% of the issues of marriage equality?
Well, I think that marriage equality is a constitutionally guaranteed right. I mean, I think it's a federal issue. It's not a state issue, that it's the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, equal protection.
Okay. On that note, going over to Twitter, @ilimelight said #PDS Live. How much power do you think the states should have as opposed to the federal government? Where does that line get?
Well, states should have power, but the federal government's power lies in the U.S. Constitution. So let's use civil rights as an example. If you left civil rights to the states, would we still have slavery in some states? And I know that's probably a harsh example, but maybe we would. So as President of the United States, you take an oath. You're going to govern under strict adherence to the U.S. Constitution. And I would argue that this is a constitutional issue.
And we talked about libertarians being socially liberal, fiscally conservative. As far as the social issue of abortion that we heard on the second debate, where do you stand?
I just unequivocally support a woman's right to choose. It's a difficult decision, but only a decision that should be dealt with by the woman involved.
I was going to jump to Twitter, but I lost it. But it was basically a question in regards to the entire process right now of electing a president is extremely frustrating for a lot of people, specifically with the Electoral College. If you were elected, would you do something to change the process? Are you a supporter of the Electoral College?
Well, I think we've probably come to the point where popular vote, we would probably be better served as opposed to the Electoral College. I'm also based in reality. This is the way that it is.
Before we kick it out to the next question, we have an update here. CBS News instant poll saying people that thought Obama won, 53%, Romney, 23%, tie, 24%, CNN saying 48% Obama to Romney, 40%.
You know, Phil, I would go along with that just personally, and it just gets back to what Obama says. It's really hard.
Well, I mean, isn't that the whole case for all the debates? What they say versus what is actually based in reality, something that you've repeated? Yeah.
Right. But this is the issue with Obama, the fact that he specifically promised that he would not crack down on medical marijuana facilities in states where legislatures or citizens voted to implement those programs. Well, here in California, he's cracked down on medical marijuana facilities, and in Colorado. And he said, who was to believe that Obama was going to double down in Afghanistan, given what he had to say when it came to military interventions, and that he would be as militaristic a president as we've ever had, intervening in Syria and Libya. There doesn't seem to be any end to what he will do and has done militarily. Gay rights. I just thought that this is an issue that would have advanced significantly under Obama, and effectively him saying that he's going to leave it to the states to decide, that's effectively saying I'm not going to do a thing because 42 states have said marriage is between a man and a woman.
Right. And I mean, I can't speak on Afghanistan or gay rights. I know specifically, in my show, I came down on Obama for cracking down on marijuana, but being in California, going to those places, those dispensaries, some of them, I understand. When you're in the room and you see people getting licenses from states that it's not legal, you go, okay. Especially as someone, I don't partake all the time, but I do believe that it should be something that is legal, and I think if we do believe it should be legal, we have to play by the rules. Otherwise, everyone looks like an idiot.
And I would just argue that should be California's role first and foremost, and not the federal government's, given his specific promise to not do that.
Okay. Do you have another question, or you want to kick to?
Yeah.
I think we're going to kick to another question, and we will be back with Governor Gary Johnson. Keep using hashtag PDS Live.
Would either of you be willing to declare that an attack on Israel is an attack on the United States, which of course is the same promise that we give to our close allies like Japan? And if you made such a declaration, would not that deter Iran? It's certainly deterred the Soviet Union for a long, long time when we made that promise to our allies.
First of all, Israel is a true friend. It is our greatest ally in the region. And if Israel is attacked, America will stand with Israel. Working with Israel, we have created the strongest military and intelligence cooperation between our two countries in history. To the issue of Iran, as long as I'm President of the United States, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon. Their currency has dropped 80%. Their oil production has plunged to the lowest level since they were fighting a war with Iraq. Iran's a state sponsor of terrorism. And for them to be able to provide nuclear technology to non-state actors, that's unacceptable. They can take the diplomatic route and end their nuclear program, or they will have to face a united world and a United States president, me, who said we're not going to take any options off the table. When I've sent young men and women into harm's way, I always understand that that is the last resort, not the first resort.
If Israel is attacked, we have their back, not just diplomatically, not just culturally, but militarily. A nuclear-capable Iran is unacceptable to America. It's also essential for us to understand what our mission is in Iran, and that is to dissuade Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Crippling sanctions are something I called for 5 years ago when I was in Israel speaking at the Herzliya conference. I laid out 7 steps. Crippling sanctions were number 1, and they do work. I would tighten those sanctions. I'd take on diplomatic isolation efforts. I would also make sure that their diplomats are treated like the pariah they are around the world. We need to increase pressure time and time again on Iran. And of course, a military action is the last resort.
Okay, so Romney and Obama saying the same crap over and over again. So going back to Twitter, once again, at the Brick Web says toward Governor Johnson, if you are not elected president, what's next? Will you continue to actively advocate libertarian values?
Yes, I will. And whether or not I'm back in 2016 or not, that would depend on me being relevant, and I'd like to be the first one making a judgment on that. And in our lives, I think our success or failure depends on whether or not we're able to effectively judge that.
So if you're not elected president, is there still a good thing if people are voting for you? I've heard the number, the 5%.
Yes, that's very, very, very significant. At 5%, you're declared a major third party. There is that recognition, and there's that funding that goes along with it that enables inclusion where there's currently exclusion.
Right, and I know that it wouldn't be the $1 billion that people talk about, but it's the $92 million matching. Is that correct?
Well, that's the pot of money. So
Right.
it's ends up to be very, very significant. I'm gonna pose this to you, that on election day, the number of votes that I receive, if you divide those votes into the money that we've spent on our campaign, versus Obama and Romney, I would say we're going to be 25 times more effective with our money.
If I were to vote for Romney, given the Electoral College, I live in a blue state, it's much easier for people who aren't in swing states to vote for a third-party candidate. If I was in Florida, it's very difficult for me. It would be more difficult for me to vote for a third-party candidate, because when I look at taxing and I look at what Obama's taxes have done to my parents' business and the effect that it's had on them, it makes it a little bit harder to sort of do that kind of like vote to send a message thing.
Well, and I would argue vote to send a message. I would argue that that's how you change things. I would argue that Ross Perot, his showing really changed both parties and the way they dealt with issues. And this has that same opportunity.
When you look at politics in general right now, do you feel like over the past 10, 15 years, do you feel like it's become more polarized and more like angry? Because I feel like right now, during that debate, both of those men could literally get into a fist fight at any time.
And a fist fight over what? That would be what I would. You know, I was really struck by the debate between Ryan and Biden the other day, where at the end of that debate, Ryan says, look, we're going to increase spending by 3%. They're going to increase spending by 4.5%. What's the big deal? Well, I would just echo that. What's the big deal? What's really going to change? I'm just going to offer up a prediction. Either one of them are elected, we're going to find ourselves with a heightened police state. We're going to find ourselves in a continued state of military intervention. We're going to find ourselves continuing to borrow and spend money in an unsustainable way, with the eventual outcome being a monetary collapse.
Okay. Let's move on to question number 5. We'll play that video. Keep using hashtag PDS Live, and we'll keep passing on the questions.
It seems to me the key question here is, what do you do if the deadline arrives and it is obvious the Afghans are unable to handle their security? Do we still leave? And I believe, Governor Romney, you go first.
Well, we're going to be finished by 2014. And when I'm president, we'll make sure we bring our troops out by the end of 2014. The commanders and the generals there are on track to do so. We've seen progress over the past several years. The surge has been successful, and the training program is proceeding apace. There are now a large number of Afghan security forces, 350,000, that are ready to step in to provide security, and we're going to be able to make that transition by the end of 2014.
When I came into office, we were still bogged down in Iraq, and Afghanistan had been drifting for a decade. We ended the war in Iraq, refocused our attention on Afghanistan, and we did deliver a surge of troops. That was facilitated in part because we had ended the war in Iraq. And we are now in a position where we have met many of the objectives that got us there in the first place. Part of what had happened is we'd forgotten why we had gone. We went because there were people who were responsible for 3,000 American deaths. And so we decimated al-Qaeda's core leadership in the border regions between Afghanistan and Pakistan. We then started to build up Afghan forces, and we're now in a position where we can transition out.
So, Governor Johnson, Obama once again talking about Afghanistan. Any thoughts on it?
Well, I would argue that after having been in Afghanistan for 6 months, we wiped out al-Qaeda. We should have gotten out of Afghanistan 11 years ago. And for all of the issues that we are going to have pulling out of Afghanistan tomorrow, we will have those identical issues 25 years from now, if that's when we finally decide to get out.
Okay, great. Let's go on to the question 5 answers right here with this video.
Is it time for us to divorce Pakistan?
No, it's not time to divorce a nation on earth that has 100 nuclear weapons and is on the way to double that at some point. A nation that has serious threats from terrorist groups within its nation. This is a nation which, if it falls apart, if it becomes a failed state, there are nuclear weapons there. And you've got terrorists there who could grab their hands onto those nuclear weapons. Pakistan is technically an ally. And they're not acting very much like an ally right now. I don't blame the administration for the fact that the relationship with Pakistan is strained. We're going to have to work with the people in Pakistan to try and help them move to a more responsible course than the one that they're on. But it's important for us to recognize that we can't just walk away from Pakistan.
What is your position on the use of drones?
Well, I believe that we should use any and all means necessary to take out people who pose a threat to us and our friends around the world. The President was right to up the usage of that technology. We're also going to have to help move the world away from terror and Islamic extremism.
So across the board, we are engaging them in building capacity in these countries. When Tunisians began to protest it, this nation, me, my administration, stood with them earlier than just about any other country. In Libya, we stood on the side of the people. And as a consequence, there is no doubt that attitudes about Americans have changed.
So I think that was one of our last clips. You guys have been sending in questions, hashtag PDS Live. Keep doing that on Twitter. Governor Johnson, one of the main criticism that I see time and time again in our feed is, do you still stand with Kony 2012?
Well, first of all, Kony 2012 was not a military intervention from the standpoint of going to military war. Based on what I know about Kony, I would have issued a letter of marque and reprisal. It was 3 African countries requesting our intervention to arguably take out the worst terrorist guy on the planet for the last 20 years, directly responsible for tens of thousands of murders, maimings, rapes. 3 African countries request it. Congress approves it. The president signs off on it. I would have asked for volunteers to be engaged in that, and I would have used letters of marque and reprisal, meaning private contractors to go in and deal with that. But I believe that, first of all, there are no military, there are no humanitarian wars. There shouldn't be any humanitarian wars. Should there be humanitarian interventions? I don't want to rule that out. I don't think any of us want to sit by and watch a Holocaust happen. If you're going to ask me what the definition of a Holocaust is, I'd like to think that if I saw a Holocaust happening, that I would be able to recognize that. And if an intervention, not an intervening war, but a specific intervention to take out a dictator that on every Tuesday kills 4,000 people on the town square, and this is something that we can prevent, I don't think any of us want to stand by and watch that kind of thing go down. That's not a war, it's an intervention. I may probably used a horrible example, but I don't think the President of the United States should ever say never.
Okay.
Perfect. And going to @DrewAllenFilms says, and I think this is an excellent question, what is more dangerous, the growing police state or the growing debt?
Well, I think they go hand in hand. The debt is what is going to befall us. It is the biggest threat facing our country right now. The fact that we're not going to have a country unless we get our spending under control. And even if we get our spending under control, we still have the debt to deal with. But at least we stand a fighting chance by balancing the federal budget now and then actually taking on the debt. But to think that this is going to fix itself, it's not. I mean, it's like an extension of, do we really think the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, and the Tooth Fairy are coming? I don't think we believe that. I think we understand that we're in deep trouble, and yet neither party is recognizing that.
Okay. And back to what you were saying just a second ago regarding seeing a Holocaust happening and nobody wanting to see that happen. Do you feel like, and again, this is you educating me because I have no idea on the matter, but when I look at what's happening in Syria, it seems like, where do you draw the line on this is the point where we need to step in? Is it a hard and fast thing, or is there other factors?
So back to my hypothetical example. If you're talking about one individual who's literally pulling the trigger and killing thousands of people, and you know where he is and when he does it, and that he's this kind of actor, as opposed to a government that's in place that is committing these atrocities, that the new regime that takes over, I mean, this was what played out in Libya, is that the new regime was proven to have had worse atrocities than Gaddafi.
So what you would do would be different based on if it was a person or like a small group of people in an entire
Well, just back to never say never,
right? Okay.
But say never to military. Say never to humanitarian wars. Say never to humanitarian wars.
Okay. We have a question from Lee Reams.
Because they don't exist. They just don't exist. Humanitarian wars just don't exist.
People just die in other kinds of wars. Is that
well? You end up in the name of goodness, you replace the bad and the good new that we back. It doesn't pan out. It just hasn't panned out.
How do you take yourself away from that knee-jerk reaction? We talked about obviously when it's personalized on a video that goes online and you see people, children dying. How do you step back from that and go,
that's back to leadership that needs to get exhibited with all the chest thumping that goes on by politicians, that in the name of look what's happening in the world, President Johnson is allowing this to occur, we should be attacking them. Well, how about a President Johnson that gets up and yells right back and gets right in their face and points out the fact that we're going to lose men and service women from this country, and points out the fact that there is nothing to suggest that more people might die. And presenting that argument and taking it on every single day. I mean, I think that's what we're hungry for. We're hungry to elect a leader.
At Mr. Quirk says, what is your take on mega upload and online piracy and freedom? I know that's kind of a complete 180, but it's something that's not getting talked about at all.
Well, there's nothing as President of the United States that I want to fix when it comes to the internet. Nothing. So back to, you know what? I have no aversion to vetoing legislation. I hope you guys would get that as a takeaway here. So there's nothing I want to fix when it comes to the internet. What I found as governor of New Mexico is they pass all sorts of legislation in the name of competition and better services for customers, when the reality is it's more of a monopoly to the provider, and it has everything to do with the provider and nothing to do with the customer. So I think that the internet falls in that same category of chest thumping. It's all about politicians that are going to save us from the ills of the world, and I just think they create more ills than what they save us from.
Okay. We have a question from Lee Reams on Twitter. You say mutual destruction is a good enough deterrent. Does it not bother you when enemy countries develop nuclear weapons? I guess the idea here would be that there would be someone so crazy they wouldn't care.
Well, I don't think someone would be that crazy. I really don't buy into that. And listen to Romney in that last statement that he made. No, we can't walk away from Pakistan because they have 100 nuclear warheads. Well, what message does that send to a country that doesn't have nuclear warheads? It's a message that we need to develop nuclear warheads to have the respect that the United States gives Pakistan, for example, that they're not going to back away from giving Pakistan their billions of dollars a year because they have nuclear warheads. There's such a mixed message that gets sent with, like I say, unintended consequences.
We have another question from Lexi Tomchek. Do you believe religious institutions should remain tax exempt?
Now I'm back to the fair tax.
Right.
Fair tax, no, those exemptions wouldn't. You know, that I should back up. I might be speaking a little out of school, but no, I don't go for the notion of tax exemptions for anybody. And then I'm back to, a balanced budget. It's mutual sacrifice on the part of all of us. And so I don't actually, might have spoke out of context with regard to a religious institution being immune from having to pay tax. I think that there is an exclusion for religious institutions because it comes under the notion that they are business entities, if you will.
Okay.
And I'm going to jump to Reddit real fast.
Reddit questions? Okay.
This is from Clean Shaven Nerf Herd. That's awesome.
What number is that?
It's question 5 on Reddit. Clean Shaven Nerf Herd says, in regards to education, what would you do as president to improve public schooling as a whole? As a college student studying to become a high school history/English teacher, this is a big deal when I see stories like the state of Kentucky cutting $50 million from education for a biblical theme park. It greatly concerns me.
So the best thing that the federal government could do when it comes to education is to abolish the Federal Department of Education. Federal Department of Education was established in 1979 under Jimmy Carter. There is nothing to suggest that the Federal Department of Education has been value added since 1979. And what the federal government does is it gives each state 11 cents out of every school dollar that every state spends. They say to the state of California, we're giving you 11 cents of every school dollar that you're going to spend, and you have to do A, B, C, and D. Well, to do A, B, C, and D, it costs California and every state 16 cents to deliver on that. So what people don't recognize is it's really a negative to take federal money. If we just got the federal government out of education completely, 50 laboratories of innovation and best practice would genuinely produce some fabulous results that would get emulated. It would also produce some horrible failure that would get avoided, but at least we would have 50 different ways, 50 different laboratories dealing with better education, as opposed to Washington top-down has all the answers.
I just had a quick question. This is kind of just something I was wondering. As a libertarian, if you look back in the past 5, 6 presidents, if you had to pick one and say like, okay, well, not perfect, didn't do a great job, would have done it a lot better, which one did the best or the least amount of crappiness?
Oh boy, you know, since I've come to awareness, I guess, I haven't been since I have been of voting age, and my first vote, I think it's apropos, was George McGovern, because George McGovern was against the Vietnam War, but every president since then in my voting category I've been disappointed with. Ronald Reagan, I was extremely disappointed in the fact that he ran up record deficits. Talked about smaller government, but the reality was record deficits. I found politics to be very disillusioning, that people that I thought were terrific, and I'm talking about modern politicians now that I've been able to come in contact with and realize that they are nothing like I thought they were. They're kind of empty suits that are all about getting elected or reelected.
Career politicians. Guys, we only have about 4 minutes left, so keep using hashtag PDS Live. We might be able to get your question in. We have Kimberly Schilling. I thought this one might be important. The second debate, we had hashtag Get Jeremy a Job at Gov Gary Johnson. I'm starting college next year. What are you going to do about jobs?
I tell you what, adopt the fair tax, eliminate income tax, corporate tax, abolish the IRS, replace it with one federal consumption tax. Tens of millions of jobs get created in this country. And for everybody watching right now, I'd like to give out a piece of advice that's worth exactly what everybody's paying for it, which is nothing. And that is, whatever your area of expertise is, apply it entrepreneurially. The rewards will be 100-fold, and you'll never regret taking advantage of yourself and what it is that you know and that you can do.
So the election passes, end of the year comes, Bush tax cuts are there. What would you do if you weren't president but you had one vote and it was over 250,000, 39%, or keep it the way it was, or just let them go out?
Well, I'm always for lower taxes, always. And I didn't raise a single tax as governor of New Mexico. The key here is slashing spending, something that we never do. We never cut spending. We raise taxes all the time, and we talk about, well, gee, we're going to spend this money this year, and the argument is always, well, we can cut back on that next year if we don't have the money. We never cut back on what we've done. Taking military spending back, cutting military spending by 43% takes us back to 2003 spending levels. Not the end of the world.
This is from @Tristy. Good question, a little random. Here's a simple change every geek wants. If you were elected, would you finally switch the United States to the metric system?
Oh,
wow.
That's top priority, I'm assuming, right?
First day in office.
You know, I might, it's all in the legislation. I might actually sign the legislation if it had to do with no sign has to be replaced immediately,
Right.
that any new sign has to be the metric system. I might sign that, yeah.
Okay.
Just believing it's it's easier to understand.
As long as all of a sudden we're not having to tear down every sign.
As long as we don't have, as long as it can be done in an orderly way, and that would be right. Existing signs can stay up as long as they want, but as soon as they have to be replaced, they be metric.
Awesome. I think we only have 2 minutes left, so is there anything that you want to get out there, leave us with at all? Kind of
Well,
putting you on the spot?
I really want to make the pitch back to this wasted vote phenomenon, that a wasted vote, in my opinion, is voting for somebody you don't really believe in. And the way that we change things in this country is to vote for the person that you most believe in, and that's how you change things. And I believe that either of the two are elected, we're going to find ourselves with a heightened police state, continued state of war, continued unsustainable spending and debt. There is nothing in my resume to suggest that I'm not going to doggedly pursue everything it is that I'm talking about here tonight. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think I could make a difference, and if I didn't think I could do a really good job as President of the United States. So I'm making the pledge to anybody that does waste their vote on me that you won't regret it.
That's what we need to do. We need to do hashtag I'm gonna waste my vote. I don't know. I mean, looking at everything, I know that it probably matters to me and maybe one other person, but when I look at your stances, it's something that I really relate to. And it's something that's very new, because I honestly wasn't aware 4 months ago. And that's why I wanted you on the show. And I think that you speak lots and lots of common sense. So thank you for being on. Where can people find out more about you?
So GaryJohnson2012.com. I would love everybody to look at the new ad that we came out today, which is on Iran and drones. It's 30 seconds. I mean, check it out. Check out the website. We've done a lot of videos that I think are very, very impactful.
Great. Also at @GovGaryJohnson on Twitter. Guys, that's really it until election night. We'll still have PDSs. I would like to thank Elliott Morgan.
Oh, thank you.
Gary Johnson. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys.
And yeah, as always, my name is Philip DeFranco. You've just been filled in. I love your faces, and we'll see you tomorrow. And then the election, and then on Twitter, and then on so many places.
Facebook and Tumblr.
Thanks so much.
Great, thank you.